The corridors of the Imperial transport ship hummed with a metallic melancholy, the kind of low resonance that seemed to seep into the bones of those who walked its narrow passageways. Mikhail Korin, a boy of 14 years, clutched the railing with small, trembling hands, his knuckles whitening beneath the coarse fabric of his uniform. Around him, the galactic empires and forcers moved with mechanical precision, their visors reflecting the pale glow of the corridor lights, their footsteps echoing like the tolling of distant bells. Mikhail's heart thudded in quiet rebellion, a staccato rhythm that dared to continue even under the watchful eyes of cameras meant to broadcast fear. He hummed a fragment of a lullaby his mother had sung when the colony's nights were warm and full of stars, long before the Empire had taken everything. The melody was fragile, a thin thread connecting him to a life that felt increasingly like a memory rather than reality. He knew they were coming for him. The charge against him was petty, a minor act of defiance, a refusal to kneel in front of the Empire's revered general, but in their eyes, it was a spectacle worth broadcasting to the galaxy. Other prisoners avoided his gaze. Humans in the corridor shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting to the floor as if looking directly at him might somehow taint their own survival. Alien guards whispered and chuckled behind his back, their tongues clicking in cruel amusement at his small, frail frame. In this moment, Mikhail felt the sharp sting of isolation, the bitter taste of shame that accompanies helplessness. He wanted to shrink into himself, to vanish into the hum of the ship's engine, but something, an unnameable defiance, kept his eyes forward. He thought of his father, though he had never met him. Baba Yaga, the name alone was whispered in fearful reverence among the humans of the outer colonies, a myth given shape in shadows and rumors. The story spoke of a man who could bend the machinery of the universe with ingenuity, a human who had become legend not through violence, but through quiet, unstoppable cunning. Mikhail had clung to the idea of him like a lifeline, the thought that someone who carried his blood could exist outside the suffocating reach of the Empire. The transport dock opened abruptly, and a blinding light washed over Mikhail. The hum of the engines was replaced by the low murmur of thousands gathered in the galactic arena, the space an enormous lattice of steel and floating walkways suspended in the void. Cameras hovered around him like predatory insects, capturing his every expression. The crowd's alien faces blurred into an impersonal sea, punctuated by the occasional gasp or ripple of approval as the Empire's ceremonial pageantry unfolded. They pushed him forward, and his feet scraped against the cold metal of the execution platform. He could see the ceremonial blade, its plasma edge flickering with lethal promise. It was intended to impress awe, to strip every human of hope in a single stroke. And yet, as Mikhail lifted his head, he did not see only fear reflected in the eyes of the audience. A small group of human children, hidden behind the crowd and trembling with their own quiet courage, raised hands and secret gestures, cheering him without sound. In their tiny defiance, he felt an echo of belonging, a reminder that even in the shadows, human dignity persisted. The executioner, a figure clad in dark ceremonial armor, raised the plasma blade with deliberate slowness, and Mikhail's heart pounded like a drumbeat of finality. He could feel the world narrowing, the vastness of the galaxy reduced to the sharp metallic scent of the platform and the distant, flickering hum of hovering cameras. Shame threatened to consume him, not from fear of death, but from the thought that his small courage might not be enough to honor those who still believed in him. He closed his eyes for a moment and let the lullaby flow from memory, each note a fragile bridge to a past he feared was slipping from him. As the first surge of light from the ceremonial blade reflected against his closed eyelids, he whispered the song, letting it rise not as a prayer for mercy, but as a testament to the human spirit, small, fragile, and unyielding. Then, without warning, the light of the arena flickered and shifted. A ripple of disturbance passed through the crowd, an imperceptible change that made the alien generals frown and the executioner hesitate. Mikhail's eyes opened to see a figure cloaked in shadow, standing at the edge of the arena. The air seemed to bend around the man, subtle but undeniable. Whispers rippled through the human spectators. Baba Yaga. Mikhail's breath caught in his throat. The myth was real. His father, the legendary figure he had imagined only in stories, had come. There was no fire, no violent explosion, only the quiet assertion of presence that commanded attention, bending the machinery of the Empire itself. Drones hesitated midair, ceremonial lights wavered, and even the plasma blade shivered as though uncertain of its own purpose. For the first time since he had been captured, Mikhail lifted his chin. His trembling hands rested lightly on the straps that bound him, and a faint, defiant smile flickered across his lips. He felt a surge of something he had never known. Certainty. Not in victory, not yet, but in belonging. The boy was not alone. The universe had shifted, if only subtly, to acknowledge his existence. Baba Yaga's gaze found him, and it was a gaze that spoke without words. Calm, deliberate, and full of unshakable strength, it communicated more than any speech could. You are not merely a boy. You are a legacy. Mikhail's chest rose with the slow, measured breath of realization. Courage, he understood, was not an absence of fear, but the quiet decision to carry the heartbeat of hope, even under the weight of an entire galaxy's scrutiny. The executioner faltered, uncertain, as if the boy had been infused with some unseen authority. In that moment, Mikhail sensed the fragile threads of rebellion, the small acts of defiance that ripple outward until they become impossible to suppress. He understood, finally, that even the smallest gesture, a song, a glance, a refusal to yield, could bend the shape of destiny in subtle, unimagined ways. And so he stood, a boy on the edge of the Empire's design terror, humming softly. Not for mercy, not for survival, but for the quiet defiance that defined what it meant to be human. For the first time, Mikhail felt that he had the power to become more than a symbol of fear. He was part of something greater, a living thread in the tapestry of resistance woven by generations who refused to bow. Above him, the cameras still hovered, but the angle had shifted. No longer were they capturing only a trembling boy. They were recording a moment of transformation. A boy who could not yet wield power, who might yet fall, but who had already discovered the depth of courage and the quiet, luminous strength of legacy. And in the hush that followed, where the arena seemed to hold its breath, Mikhail Korin realized that life's most profound victories are rarely declared in shouts. Sometimes, they are whispered, carried in a song that refuses to die, seen only by those brave enough to notice. The arena trembled with a hum that seemed to come not from machinery, but from the collective anticipation of thousands. Mikhail's heart thrummed in unison, each beat a fragile drum of defiance against the meticulously orchestrated terror of the Galactic Empire. He could feel the cold metal beneath his palms, the straps pressing against his shoulders, yet beneath the physical constraints was something far stronger, an awareness that he was no longer alone. The whispered presence of his father, Baba Yaga, resonated across the arena like a hidden current, subtle but undeniable, bending the atmosphere itself toward impossibility. The Empire's executioner shifted uneasily, the ceremonial plasma blade flickering as if sensing the unseen force in the boy's corner. The general's faceless masks reflected disapproval and confusion, a mirrored chaos that had no place in their carefully maintained order. Mikhail's gaze swept the arena, taking in the thousands of alien faces, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, expectation, and thinly veiled disdain. Even in this foreign throng, however, small pockets of human eyes met his, trembling but resolute. Children, soldiers, laborers, their secret gestures told him that hope was not lost. Their courage, fragile and quiet, was an echo of what his father had taught, a lesson he had yet to fully understand. A faint wind, almost imperceptible, stirred through the arena, carrying with it the metallic scent of the machinery and the faint perfume of the distant stars. Baba Yaga emerged further into view, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Every step seemed to absorb the tension around him, leaving a ripple of calm in its wake. Drones faltered midair, hovering in suspended uncertainty, and the holographic projections of the Empire's insignia quivered, as if unsure of their allegiance. It was not aggression that radiated from him, nor spectacle, but an effortless command that seemed to exist beyond the reach of fear. Mikhail's chest swelled with something unfamiliar, pride, tethered by love and awe. The executioner's hands shook, and Mikhail noticed a tremor in the mechanical arm that had been programmed to exact death with flawless precision. The boy realized that the arena's machinery, designed to make every human feel insignificant, had become secondary to the quiet, invisible authority his father exuded. A subtle ripple of light bent through the arena's void, bending toward the boy as though the universe itself recognized the presence of legacy. Mikhail's mind raced, thoughts colliding in a kaleidoscope of fear and wonder. Could this truly be his father? Baba Yaga, the whispered legend, the mythic figure who had evaded the Empire's grasp for decades, standing there, silent but commanding in the very arena meant to crush him. His small hands flexed against the straps, not out of rebellion, but anticipation. The boy was awakening to a truth he had only imagined in dreams. Courage was not merely born of self-preservation. It was inherited, learned, cultivated like a fragile seed in barren soil. Suddenly, the air pulsed with a subtle, almost musical resonance, vibrations that traveled through the platform and into Mikhail's chest. The ceremonial lights dimmed slightly, and the plasma blade's edge flickered uncertainly. A murmur spread through the crowd, a sound caught between astonishment and fear. It was not loud, not violent, yet it carried authority that no weapon could match. The Empire's generals exchanged hurried glances, their confidence cracking like ice under pressure, and Mikhail realized that the boy who had trembled mere moments ago now stood on the threshold of transformation. Then, the first voice came from the shadows of the arena, deep and measured, carrying an almost musical cadence that silenced all others. "The boy belongs to no one who does not see him," it said. The words were simple, yet they struck through the heart of the spectacle. Drones froze, soldiers paused, and even the ceremonial guards felt the tremor of something beyond comprehension. Mikhail felt a warmth, a tether to a force greater than fear, something that could not be quantified or conquered by the Empire's logic. The executioner's hesitation grew, the ceremonial blade wavering midair. Mikhail inhaled deeply, drawing in the artificial scent of the arena and the electric pulse of expectation. He closed his eyes briefly and remembered his mother's lullaby, the song he had hummed for solace, now transformed into a declaration. Each note vibrated in resonance with the quiet force emanating from Baba Yaga, intertwining hope, defiance, and unspoken legacy into a single, palpable current. Baba Yaga moved then, not with the haste of confrontation, but with the grace of inevitability. His hand lifted, pointing toward the mechanical contraption controlling the execution, and the machinery stuttered, as if recognizing a power it could not oppose. Mikhail felt the pulse of that subtle command reach him, the awareness that fear need not define the shape of destiny. It was in the quiet, the unseen, the deliberate gestures that true power lived. The boy's chest rose and fell with a steadiness he had never known. For the first time, he felt the alignment of legacy and presence, a connection that transcended the physical barriers of the arena. He met his father's gaze, and no words were necessary. The unspoken conversation carried volumes. "You are not merely surviving," it said. "You are inheriting." The crowd, oblivious to the deeper undercurrents, still reacted with gasps and murmurs, yet some among them, the children, the laborers, the humans who had quietly watched, recognized the shift. They felt it in the subtle bending of light, the hesitation of programmed authority, the quiet defiance that made a boy and a myth one. Mikhail realized that courage, once ignited, spread silently but irreversibly, like fire through dry grass or stars across the void. Then came the first crack of tangible intervention. A drone carrying the ceremonial energy projector faltered, wobbling in midair before dropping harmlessly to the platform. Another attempted to recalibrate, only to freeze in suspended uncertainty. Mikhail's gaze followed each faltering mechanism with wonder and dawning comprehension. His father's presence was not brute force, but meticulous orchestration, bending technology with precision and subtlety beyond imagination. A sense of clarity washed over him. Fear had no dominion here, nor shame. The boy realized that the audience, the empire, even the platform itself, were secondary. What mattered was the inheritance of courage, the lineage of defiance, and the quiet knowledge that legacy is felt more profoundly than it is spoken. His small fingers flexed against the straps, not with the desire to escape, but with the realization that he was the continuation of something far greater than his own fragile self. Baba Yaga took another deliberate step forward, and the executioner finally lowered the blade, a mechanical apology for the terror it had been meant to impose. Mikhail's lips curved in a faint, almost imperceptible smile. He was trembling, yes, but not from fear. His pulse carried the rhythm of recognition, connection, and awakening. The myth of his father had become flesh and presence. The boy's vulnerability had been transformed into quiet, luminous defiance. As the arena remained suspended in uncertain silence, Mikhail inhaled the electric air and let the lullaby rise again, each note stronger, clearer, carrying with it the heartbeat of hope, resilience, and the quiet power of human ingenuity. In that suspended moment, he understood that the smallest acts, humble, deliberate, and unseen, could shape destinies and bend the universe in ways no brute force ever could. Above, the cameras still hovered, capturing the boy and the legend of his father, but no longer as a victim. They now recorded transformation, legacy, and the quiet bloom of courage in a child who had only moments before been defined by fragility. The murmurs of humans and the uncertain hesitation of aliens alike testified to something simple, profound, and timeless. That humanity's truest strength lay not in conquest, but in the small, deliberate acts of grace that endure against impossible odds. Mikhail's heartbeat slowed, harmonizing with the subtle resonance of his father's presence. He met Baba Yaga's gaze once more, and this time, it was not fear or awe alone, but recognition of inheritance, of potential, and of the quiet truth that courage is never a solitary act. The boy, trembling and small, had become the nucleus of hope, a living testament that even in the darkest corridors of an oppressive galaxy, the light of legacy and quiet defiance could not be extinguished. The arena's lights flickered uncertainly, casting long, wavering shadows across the gleaming metal platforms. Mikhail Korin's breath came slow and deliberate now, each inhale a quiet assertion that he was more than a boy caught in the machinery of terror. His father, Baba Yaga, had moved like a shadow through the periphery, dismantling the Empire's intricate controls with gestures that seemed more ritual than combat. The boy watched with awe as drones froze midair, guards hesitated, and the ceremonial plasma blade shivered in indecision, a testament to the subtle authority his father wielded without raising a weapon. The Empire's generals barked orders that dissolved into chaos. Systems meant to maintain absolute control were faltering, and for the first time, Mikhail noticed fear reflected in the faces of those who had never known it. Aliens accustomed to obedience and humans trained into compliance now found themselves witnessing something incomprehensible. A boy standing at the edge of death, shielded not by might, but by legacy, ingenuity, and the unbroken thread of human resilience. Mikhail's eyes traced his father's movements, each step precise, each gesture deliberate. Baba Yaga had taught him without speaking, communicating through presence, through subtle manipulation of the machinery, and through the invisible gravity of unwavering certainty. The boy felt a surge of understanding. Courage was not flashy or loud. It was quiet, deliberate, and contagious. It spread in small, almost imperceptible waves that could shift the balance of entire worlds. Then came the critical moment. The executioner, uncertain and trembling, attempted to reactivate the plasma blade. Mikhail's pulse quickened, but instead of fear, he felt clarity. Baba Yaga's gaze met his, steady and unyielding. And that look was a transmission of unspoken confidence, a silent message that Mikhail was no longer merely a participant in the spectacle. He was the axis around which change was pivoting. The ceremonial blade faltered once more, arcs of energy sputtering harmlessly into the platform. The audience gasped collectively, and in that collective inhalation, Mikhail realized that human defiance, once ignited, rippled outward. The whispers of hope among the children and hidden spectators had grown into a current that touched every corner of the arena. Courage, he understood, was never contained. It expanded when seen, felt, and mirrored. Baba Yaga approached, each step leaving a subtle trace of authority in its wake. The boy felt the presence as much as he saw it, a weightless force that filled the void around him. Then, without a word, his father's hand brushed lightly across the platform controls, and the remaining drones stuttered and paused, their programmed obedience undone by an almost invisible touch. The Empire's mechanical tyranny, so precise and omnipotent, crumbled under subtle mastery rather than overt confrontation. Mikhail's heart thrummed with something larger than fear, an awakening to the depth of what it meant to be human. He realized that survival alone was never enough. To live fully was to recognize the legacy one inherited, to nurture courage in ways both small and profound, and to allow hope to flourish even under the weight of oppression. The boy lifted his head higher, his voice rising in the lullaby he had hummed moments before. It was no longer a whisper, no longer a fragile thread, but a song infused with clarity, defiance, and inherited strength. The arena seemed to hold its breath. For the first time, Mikhail felt the curvature of destiny in his own hands. He was trembling, yes, but now not from fear. He was trembling from recognition, from the realization that the line between myth and reality had narrowed, and he stood firmly on that threshold. Even the alien spectators, many of whom had regarded humans as insignificant, now shifted in unease. The subtle authority radiating from Baba Yaga and mirrored in Mikhail's growing composure challenged the Empire's narrative, demonstrating that the smallest human, if imbued with awareness and courage, could alter the trajectory of events designed to suppress them. The executioner lowered the blade entirely, the ceremonial act reduced to a hollow gesture. Mikhail's trembling hands relaxed against the straps, and he felt the first taste of true freedom, not because the Empire had relented, but because he had discovered the inner mechanics of resilience and quiet influence. Baba Yaga extended a hand toward him, and for the first time, Mikhail stepped forward willingly, letting the myth become flesh and presence in his own life. The boy and his father embraced, a silent exchange that spoke of inheritance, guidance, and the deep understanding that courage is more than action. It is a living, breathing thread connecting generations. No words were necessary. Their gestures, the subtle pressures and tilts of hands and shoulders, conveyed more than any speech could. In that embrace, Mikhail recognized that he had not merely survived, but had become part of a legacy that would ripple outward, touching lives in ways the Empire could neither anticipate nor control. The arena gradually regained a semblance of order, but the energy had shifted irreversibly. The Empire's systems no longer commanded the awe they once had. Spectators, both human and alien, felt the quiet hum of possibility, the subtle realization that oppression could be challenged not always through violence, but through ingenuity, presence, and courage transmitted in ways the tyrants never anticipated. The boy who had been presented as a symbol of fear had transformed into a beacon of hope, a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure, inspire, and reclaim dignity. Mikhail's gaze wandered over the crowd, seeking out the children who had silently supported him. He nodded slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement and gratitude. The smallest acts of solidarity, the tiniest gestures of recognition, had become the threads that wove courage into the fabric of reality. He understood now that human resilience was not measured by brute force alone, but by the capacity to hold one's heartbeat steady, to stand in defiance, and to let subtle influence shape outcomes across impossible odds. As Baba Yaga guided him from the platform, Mikhail allowed himself to feel the quiet triumph of awakening. The boy who had trembled under the weight of execution now walked with purpose, carrying not only his own survival, but the inheritance of courage and ingenuity passed down from generations of humans who had refused to bow. The arena, once designed to suppress humanity, had become a stage where the quiet defiance of a single boy and the mythic presence of his father had redefined the perception of power and dignity. Outside, in the corridors of the transport and the void beyond, whispers of the event rippled across colonies. The story of Mikhail and Baba Yaga would travel faster than any official broadcast, carried in the human memory as a reminder that courage, subtlety, and presence could bend the universe's strictest designs. Children would hum the lullaby in secret, laborers would whisper the tale as encouragement, and even the Empire would feel the tremor of a lesson they could neither quantify nor contain. And in the quiet after the storm, when the metallic hum of machinery returned to its usual rhythm, Mikhail sat beneath the artificial stars of the docking bay, his small fingers brushing across the surface of a table worn by generations of human hands. He hummed the lullaby once more, not as a plea for mercy, but as a song of enduring defiance. He understood now that legacy was lived in small, deliberate acts, and that courage is measured in the quiet consistency of heartbeat and will. He looked outward, imagining the millions who had watched, knowingly or unknowingly, the moment when a boy had stood firm against an empire, guided by the subtle, deliberate authority of a father who was myth incarnate. And in that reflection, he whispered to himself, and to all who might someday hear his story, that even the vastest, coldest void, the human spirit carries its own gravity, bending the course of events in ways unseen but profoundly felt. Remember this, dear reader. In a galaxy where power often seems absolute, the smallest acts of grace, courage, and connection ripple endlessly. A song whispered in fear can become a symphony of defiance. A heartbeat held steady can inspire generations. Even when the stars themselves seem indifferent, let your light, however small, touch the darkness with unwavering hope. It is in these quiet, deliberate moments that the true measure of humanity is found.